A little backstory. A few years ago, Emily brought up the idea of an open marriage. She'd been reading articles about it, and at the time, I thought it was just a phase. I wasn't thrilled, but she convinced me it could spice things up. Think of it as a way to strengthen us, she said. It wasn't easy at first, but we set boundaries. Absolute honesty. No one from our inner circle. Always come back to each other. At first, it was fine. She went on a couple of dates. I had a brief fling, and we'd always come back together stronger, or so I thought. Looking back, I see how blind I was. The night everything changed started like any other. I'd just gotten home from work, exhausted after a long day, when Emily announced she was going out. Just drinks with a co-worker, she said casually, slipping on her heels. Something about the way she said it felt off. Which co-worker? I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. She rolled her eyes. Why do you care? It's open, remember? I let it go, but that nagging feeling didn't leave me. When she left, I found myself pacing the living room, my mind racing. That's when I noticed her laptop on the counter, still open. I hesitated. We'd promised honesty, but this wasn't about trust anymore. It was about the pit in my stomach that told me something wasn't right. I opened her email. At first, there was nothing unusual: work updates, newsletters, the usual junk. But then I found a folder labeled personal. Inside were emails between Emily and someone named Adam. The messages were explicit, intimate, and worst of all, filled with lies about me. Emily, James is so clueless. He actually thinks this is just drinks with a co-worker. Adam, he doesn't deserve you. You're too good for him. Emily, I can't wait to see you tonight. I'll make sure he's asleep by the time I get home. My hands were shaking as I closed the laptop. She came home late that night, smelling of whiskey and cologne. How was it? I asked, my voice strained. Fine, she said, kicking off her shoes. Why are you still up? I couldn't sleep. I lied. She kissed me on the cheek, muttered something about being tired, and went to bed. I stayed up all night, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I'd been so blind. The next day, I called a private investigator. Find out everything, I said. I need to know who this guy is and how long this has been going on. The PI was efficient. Within days, I had photos, texts, and proof that Emily wasn't just bending our boundaries. She was shattering them. Adam wasn't a co-worker. He was her yoga instructor. The PI discovered that their relationship wasn't new. It had started months ago, and it wasn't just physical. They were talking about a future together. Once James finds someone else, we can finally be together, she wrote in one text. Adam's response made me sick. Or just keep him clueless. He's too trusting to figure it out. That night, I confronted her. Who's Adam? I asked, holding up my phone with the screenshots. Her face turned pale, but she quickly recovered, crossing her arms defensively. He's just a friend, she said. You're overreacting. Don't lie to me, Emily, I snapped. I know everything. She tried to gaslight me, turning the conversation around. This is your fault, James. You agreed to this. I couldn't believe her audacity. This isn't what we agreed to, I said. You broke every rule we set. Her response was cold. Maybe the rules were stupid to begin with. I walked out that night, staying at a friend's house while I tried to process everything. But it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The morning after I walked out, I sat in my friend Dave's kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee and replaying the confrontation in my head. Dave had been my best friend since high school, the kind of guy who always knew when to listen and when to tell you to get your head out of your ass. So, what's your plan? He asked, leaning against the counter. I don't know, I admitted. I need time to think. Dave raised an eyebrow. Time's fine, but don't let her spin this around on you. She's probably already working on her next move. He was right. Emily wasn't the type to sit back and let things happen to her. When I got home later that day, Emily was waiting for me. She was sitting at the kitchen table, her arms crossed and her face set in a mask of defiance. We need to talk, she said. I sighed, setting my bag down. Talk about what, Emily? You lied. You cheated. What else is there to say? She stood up, her voice rising. You're blowing this way out of proportion. Adam isn't some big secret. I've told you about him before. He's just a friend. I pulled out my phone, scrolling to the screenshots the PI had sent me. Friends don't send texts like this. I said, holding up the screen. Her face flushed, but she didn't back down. Maybe if you weren't so distant all the time, I wouldn't need to find comfort elsewhere. The audacity of her words hit me like a slap to the face. I've been distant because I've been working my ass off to support this family, I snapped. While you've been running around behind my back, she scoffed, crossing her arms. You act like you're some perfect husband, James. Newsflash, you're not. I stared at her, a mixture of anger and disbelief churning in my chest. You don't get to turn this around on me, I said. You broke the rules, Emily. You betrayed me. For a moment, she looked like she might cry, but then she squared her shoulders and said, maybe the rules weren't working for me anymore. That was the moment I realized she didn't regret what she'd done. She regretted getting caught. The next day, I called the private investigator again. Dig deeper, I said. If she's hiding this much, there's probably more. I wasn't wrong. A week later, the PI called me with an update. You're not going to like this, he said. Just tell me, I said, bracing myself. He sent over another folder. This one even more damning than the last. Emily wasn't just seeing Adam. There were others. One man was a co-worker she'd been having drinks with after work. Another was a guy she'd met at the gym. And then there were the financial records. The PI discovered that Emily had been siphoning money from our joint account into a private one under her maiden name. She'd spent thousands on hotel rooms, expensive dinners, and gifts for these men. I sat in my car, staring at the photos and receipts, my hands shaking with rage. This wasn't just a betrayal. This was a full-scale operation. That night, I confronted her again. Who else, Emily? I asked, slamming the folder onto the table. She glanced at it but didn't touch it. What's this? She asked, feigning ignorance. More proof, I said. You've been cheating with more than just Adam, haven't you? Her eyes narrowed, and she crossed her arms. So what if I have? She said defiantly. You agreed to an open marriage. This is what you signed up for. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This isn't an open marriage, Emily, I said, my voice rising. This is you lying, cheating, and stealing. There's nothing open about that. She rolled her eyes, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Oh, please. Don't act like you've been some innocent saint in all of this. I haven't lied to you, I said. I haven't stolen from you. And I sure as hell haven't gone behind your back like this. She didn't respond, but the look in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. She didn't feel guilty. She felt entitled. Over the next few days, Emily's behavior became increasingly erratic. She'd alternate between apologizing and blaming me, trying to manipulate me into dropping the issue. One night, she cornered me in the kitchen. James, she said softly, placing a hand on my arm. We can fix this. I know I've made mistakes, but I love you. I don't want to lose you. I stared at her hand, then looked into her eyes. Do you even hear yourself? I asked. You don't love me, Emily. You love what I provide for you. A house, stability, someone to clean up your messes. She flinched, but I kept going. I'm done being your safety net, I said. If you want this marriage to work, you need to start being honest. About everything. Her face twisted in anger, and she pulled her hand away. You're such a hypocrite, she spat. You want honesty, but you've been snooping through my things like a creep. I laughed bitterly. You're right, Emily, I said. I shouldn't have had to snoop. You should have just told me the truth. She stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. The next day, I received another call from the private investigator. You're not going to believe this, he said. He'd uncovered something even worse. Emily wasn't just juggling multiple affairs. She was planning to leave me. The private investigator's call haunted me for the rest of the day. James, he said, his voice serious, Emily's not just having affairs. She's been planning to leave you, and she's been preparing for months. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Leave me, I repeated, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. The PI sighed. She's already leased an apartment under her maiden name, he said. Downtown, fully furnished. She's been transferring money from your joint accounts to pay for it. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. How much? I asked. Close to $50,000 over the past 6 months, he said. My stomach churned. $50,000. Money I thought we'd been saving for the kids' college funds, for family vacations, for our future. Gone. The PI continued. She's also been talking to a lawyer. Based on the evidence I've gathered, it looks like she's planning to file for divorce as soon as the apartment is ready. It felt like a punch to the gut. Divorce? After everything she'd done, she had the audacity to plan her escape like she was the victim? When I got home, Emily was in the living room, scrolling through her phone like nothing was wrong. She glanced up when I walked in. "You're late," she said, her tone indifferent. I didn't respond. Instead, I went upstairs and locked myself in the office, pulling out the file the PI had sent me. Inside were photos of her downtown apartment. Modern furniture, tasteful decor, and a nursery. A nursery! That detail hit me harder than I expected. She wasn't just planning to leave me. She was planning to start a new life. Without me. The next morning, I called my lawyer. "We need to act fast," I said. "She's draining our accounts and hiding assets." The lawyer was calm and methodical. "First, we'll freeze the joint accounts," she said. "Then we'll file for an injunction to prevent her from transferring any more funds." By the end of the day, the accounts were frozen, and the legal paperwork was in motion. Emily had no idea what was coming. That evening, she announced she was going out again. "Drinks with friends," she said, slipping on her heels. I watched her leave, my mind racing. I knew she wasn't meeting friends. She was meeting him. I followed her this time, keeping a safe distance as she drove downtown. Sure enough, she pulled into the parking lot of a trendy restaurant, where Adam was waiting for her. I parked across the street, my hands shaking as I watched them embrace. They laughed, kissed, and walked inside, completely oblivious to the fact that I was watching. The betrayal burned like acid in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't the time to confront her. Not yet. The next day, the private investigator called again. "James, we've uncovered something else," he said. My heart sank. "What now?" I asked. He hesitated before responding. "Emily's not just seeing Adam," he said. "There's another man." Another man. At this point, I didn't think I could be shocked anymore, but the PI proved me wrong. The second man, let's call him Ryan, was someone she'd been seeing for almost a year. "Ryan's a co-worker," the PI said. "They've been meeting at hotels during lunch breaks, and he's been sending her money." Sending her money? I flipped through the new file the PI had sent over. There were texts between Emily and Ryan, receipts for hotel stays, and even photos of them together. In one text, Ryan wrote, "I can't wait until it's just us. No more sneaking around." Emily's response made my blood boil. "Soon. I'm almost free. Almost free." That night, Emily came home late again, her makeup slightly smudged and her hair messy. "Late meeting?" I asked casually. She froze for a split second before forcing a smile. "Yes," she said. "It ran longer than expected." I nodded, hiding my anger. "Must have been important," I said. She shrugged, heading upstairs to shower. While she was in the shower, I went through her purse again. This time, I found a burner phone. The phone was filled with messages to both Adam and Ryan, each more incriminating than the last. Emily had been telling both men the same lies she'd told me. "Adam, you're the only one who understands me." "Ryan, James doesn't appreciate me like you do." I took screenshots of everything, forwarding them to myself. That night, I didn't sleep. The betrayal was too deep, too calculated. I knew I couldn't wait much longer. The next day, I met with my lawyer again. "We need to file for divorce immediately," I said. The lawyer nodded. "With the evidence you've gathered, we'll have a strong case," she said. By the end of the week, the divorce papers were ready. I decided to serve Emily at her downtown apartment. I wanted her to feel the full weight of her lies and betrayal. When I arrived, I knocked on the door, and she answered, her face lighting up in surprise. "James, what are you doing here?" I handed her the papers, my expression cold. "Read them," I said. Her smile faded as she flipped through the pages. "You're divorcing me?" she asked, her voice shaking. "You left me no choice," I said. She tried to argue, but I walked away, leaving her standing there, stunned and speechless. The day I served Emily with the divorce papers was the first time I'd seen her truly shaken. She stood in the doorway of her downtown apartment, clutching the papers like they were some kind of cruel joke. "You can't be serious," she said, her voice trembling. "Oh, I'm dead serious," I replied. This is what happens when you betray someone who trusted you. I didn't wait for her response. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there with her carefully crafted double life crumbling around her. But I wasn't done. The divorce papers were just the beginning. Over the next few days, I worked with my lawyer to finalize the case. With the evidence I had, texts, photos, financial records, Emily didn't have a leg to stand on. Still, I knew she wasn't going to go down quietly. 2 days later, she showed up at the house unannounced. The kids were at school, and I was working from home when I heard the knock on the door. I opened it to find Emily standing there, her face pale and her eyes red from crying. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice soft. I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. "What's there to talk about, Emily?" I asked. "You cheated. You lied. You stole from me. What more do you think needs to be said?" She flinched at my words, but didn't back down. "I made mistakes," she said. "But James, this is extreme. Divorce? Do you really want to throw everything away?" I laughed bitterly. "I'm not the one who threw everything away," I said. "That was all you." She stepped closer, lowering her voice to a pleading whisper. "I still love you," she said. "We can fix this. Please, let's just talk." I stepped back, shaking my head. "You don't love me, Emily," I said. "You love the idea of me. Someone to clean up your messes, someone to pay the bills, someone to raise your kids while you live your double life." Her face twisted in anger. "That's not fair," she snapped. "You act like you're perfect, but you're not. You've been distant, focused on work, ignoring me. What was I supposed to do?" I stared at her, the audacity of her words leaving me speechless. "What were you supposed to do?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You were supposed to talk to me. To be honest. Not cheat with multiple men and drain our accounts." She tried to argue, but I held up a hand to stop her. "Enough, Emily," I said. "You don't get to justify this. You don't get to play the victim here." For a moment, she looked like she might cry, but then her expression hardened. "You'll regret this," she said. "Maybe," I replied, "but at least I'll still have my integrity." That night, I received an email from her lawyer. "Dear Mr. Carter, my client intends to contest the divorce and seek joint custody of the children. Sincerely, John Whitaker." I forwarded the email to my lawyer, who assured me it was just a scare tactic. "She doesn't have a case," she said. "The evidence is overwhelmingly in your favor." But Emily wasn't giving up. She started showing up at the kids' school, trying to talk to them during lunch. Emily even went so far as to email the principal, accusing me of alienating the kids from her. The kids, however, were having none of it. When I asked them if they wanted to see their mom, Emily, my daughter, crossed her arms and shook her head. "She lied to us," she said. "Why would I want to see her?" Michael, my son, was more direct. "She doesn't care about us," he said. "She just cares about herself." Their words were heartbreaking, but I couldn't blame them. Emily had burned every bridge, and now she was facing the consequences. The final confrontation came a week later. Emily called me, asking to meet one last time. "I need closure," she said. "Please, James, just give me an hour." Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown. When I walked in, she was already seated, stirring her coffee nervously. She looked different, tired, disheveled, like someone who had lost control of her life. "Thank you for meeting me," she said as I sat down. "What do you want, Emily?" I asked, cutting straight to the point. She sighed, setting her spoon down. I want to explain," she said. "I know I've hurt you, and I'm sorry. I really am." I stared at her, waiting for the excuses to start. And they did. "I felt neglected," she said. "You were always working, always tired. I needed something more." I laughed bitterly. "So you turned to Adam? And Ryan? And God knows who else?" She flinched but didn't deny it. "I made mistakes," she said. "But I never stopped loving you." "Love?" I repeated, shaking my head. "You don't love me, Emily. If you did, you wouldn't have done this." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't feel any sympathy. "I want to fix this," she said. "For the kids, for us. Please, James, give me another chance." I leaned forward, my voice steady. "This isn't about second chances, Emily," I said. "This is about accountability. And for once in your life, you're going to face the consequences of your actions. She stared at me, her tears falling silently. I hope it was worth it, I said, standing up, because you've lost everything. I walked out of the coffee shop, leaving her behind. And this time I didn't look back. Walking out of that coffee shop felt like stepping into a new life. For months, my world had been a whirlwind of lies, betrayal, and heartbreak. But now, with Emily out of the picture, I finally had room to breathe. I wasn't naive enough to think things would be easy from here. Picking up the pieces of a shattered life is never simple. But for the first time in a long time, I felt hope. The kids were my top priority. Emily's betrayal had shaken them just as much as it had shaken me. They'd lost trust in her, and I knew it would take time for them to process everything. One evening, Emily, my daughter, came into the living room holding a framed photo of the four of us from a family vacation. "Do we have to keep this?" she asked, her voice quiet. I looked at the photo, a snapshot of happier times that now felt like a cruel joke. "No," I said gently. "We don't have to keep anything that hurts." She nodded, setting the frame aside. "Do you think she misses us?" she asked after a long pause. I sighed, choosing my words carefully. "I think she misses what she had," I said. "But I don't think she understood what she was losing when she made her choices." Emily seemed to accept that, curling up next to me on the couch. Michael, on the other hand, was more direct in his anger. "Why did she do it?" he asked one night while we were playing catch in the yard. "I don't know," I admitted. "Sometimes people make selfish choices without thinking about how they'll hurt others." He frowned, throwing the ball harder than usual. "I don't want to see her again," he said. I caught the ball, my chest tightening. "You don't have to," I said. "Not until you're ready." The next few weeks were focused on rebuilding a sense of normalcy. I started cooking dinner every night, something Emily had always done before. The first few meals were disasters: burned pasta, overcooked chicken. But the kids didn't seem to mind. "You're getting better," Emily said one night, trying to stifle a laugh as I scraped blackened edges off a pizza. Laughter. It had been so rare in our house during those last months with Emily. Hearing it again felt like a small victory. I also started therapy, something I'd been hesitant about at first. But sitting in that room, talking through the anger, the sadness, the betrayal, it helped. "You've been through a lot," my therapist said during one session. "But you're still standing. That's something to be proud of." Pride wasn't something I'd felt in a long time, but she was right. I was still standing. Meanwhile, Emily was still trying to reach out. She called, texted, and even sent letters, alternating between apologies and accusations. "You're turning the kids against me," one letter read. "I'm still their mother, and they deserve to have me in their lives." But the kids weren't interested. Every time she called, Emily would hand me the phone, shaking her head. "I don't have anything to say to her," she'd say. Michael was even more blunt. "Why should I talk to someone who doesn't care about us?" he asked. Their anger broke my heart, but I knew it wasn't my place to force reconciliation. Emily also tried to manipulate me through the courts. She filed motions for joint custody, claiming she'd changed and wanted to be part of the kids' lives. But my lawyer shut her down at every turn. "She doesn't have a case," she assured me. "The evidence is overwhelmingly in your favor." Still, the legal battles were draining. Every time I thought we were done, Emily found a new angle to attack. "She just wants control," my lawyer said after one particularly ridiculous motion. "Don't let her get under your skin." I took her advice to heart, focusing on the things I could control: my relationship with the kids, my career, my mental health. One afternoon, I got a call from the private investigator. "Thought you want to know," he said. "Emily's moved out of her downtown apartment." "Where'd she go?" I asked, my stomach tightening. "Not sure yet," he said. "But she's not living with Adam or Ryan anymore." The news didn't surprise me. Her web of lies had finally caught up with her, leaving her isolated and alone. A few weeks later, I received one last letter from her. "James, I know I've made mistakes, and I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I want you to know I'm trying to change. I'm in therapy now, working on myself. I hope one day you and the kids can forgive me. Emily." I didn't know if her words were genuine or just another attempt at manipulation, but I decided it didn't matter. The chapter with Emily was closed. As the months went by, life slowly started to feel normal again. The kids and I found a new rhythm, creating routines and traditions that didn't include Emily. One evening, we had a movie night in the living room, complete with popcorn and blanket forts. As we laughed and teased each other, Emily looked up at me and said, "I like it better this way." "Me too," I said, smiling. For the first time in years, I felt at peace.